$500 per month, plus interest, we'll say is $150 per month. So Keaton pays back $160 per month. Does this make sense? Now let's say that this is over time, let's say this is a 5%, let's say this is 5% interest. Okay? So Keaton is paying back not only the $10,000 that he borrowed, but also 5% more money. Does this make sense? Now, if there's a gold standard, what's the problem for Keaton? What's the problem for Keaton if there is a gold standard?
There's not enough money in circulation.
There is a finite or limited amount of money in circulation, right? So what happens is it becomes really hard for Keaton to pay back his loans. Does this make sense? And who's making off really, really well? The banks, right? Because if there's a finite or definitive amount of money and he's getting the bank's getting what they gave him plus extra, the bank's doing really well. Does this make sense? What many small farmers wanted was something called inflation. They wanted prices to be a little bit higher, and they wanted to go off the gold standard. If they go off the gold standard, what happens to the amount of money in circulation? It increases. And if there's more money in circulation, what does that mean for his ability to pay back that loan?
It's easier.
It's easier because this 5% stays 5%, right? So it'll be easier for you to pay back your loan. Banks love the gold standard. Small farmers hated it. Small farmers, in fact, wanted them to have what's called bimetallism, to mine a bunch of silver and to have the currency be backed by silver and gold. In fact, if you've read the book, in the movie, what are Dorothy's slippers made out of? What are they? They're ruby slippers. In the book, what are they? They're silver slippers, right? Because silver is the path to getting help. Does this make sense? So, if you understand that after the Civil War, money and banking issues are becoming, and inflation become the big issue. What was the big issue before Civil War? Slavery and enslavement territories, right? And in the Second Great Awakening, we had some women's rights and abolition stuff and that kind of stuff. But after the Civil War, a lot of it's going to be Reconstruction and money or banking issues. Are you with me on this? Understanding this will make this unit very easy to understand. Not understanding it will not. I've had kids who are very, very smart kids who can't wrap their heads around this. So please ask questions if you need them, or maybe I can re-explain or whatever. Sure. You want me to sit next to it like this?
Sure.
You have point to like you're actually teaching the action.
No.
This is like mine.
You're not even in the picture. He's in the picture.
That face.
All right.
This will make you feel better. I'll put a picture of you too.
No, you know what? It's your past.
Find your essay. How about you?
All right. So let's talk about the Ohio idea. Ohio is an absurd state that touches Kentucky. No Republican in the history of Republicans has ever won an election without winning Ohio. Ohio was the key for Republicans to win. And during the 1868 election and beyond, Ohio becomes important, and it becomes a center of the issue of money and inflation, right? The Ohio idea is about the Ohio idea was a call. Hold on, let me make sure I'm telling you this correct. The Ohio idea was poor farmers, small farmers, calling for more circulation of money. And remind me, more circulation of money increases what? Inflation. And why do they want this? Because they want to be able to pay back their loans more easily. Because under this system, banks and manufacturers and railroads are making tons of money.
What election?
1868. Yes.
Small farmers.
Small farmers want inflation. Just, I mean, do you understand why? For what we just talked about, right? Because they use inflation to pay back loans for them needing to get manufacturing, like reapers and tillers and tractors, and more seed. The Ohio idea was about having more inflation. This was an idea that Democrats liked. Republicans, specifically Grant and other Republicans, did not like this. They supported a more strict gold standard. So what you're going to start seeing is this election makes money part of the election. Now Grant won the election, but he only won by 500,000 votes, which is not much. In fact, do you know who actually got him the victory? Who still had their voting rights pretty well by 1868? They hadn't been taken away yet. Black people. African Americans and free blacks helped Grant win this election. And the Republicans are going to start to stand for the gold standard, and they're going to ally themselves with big businesses and banks. And Democrats are going to be the party of the small farmers and the South. Okay? So you're going to start seeing some changes. In fact, we're going to learn about a guy named William James Bryant. Has anyone ever heard of William James Bryant before? I bet you have, and you didn't know it. How many of you, once again, have ever seen The Wizard of Oz? He's the cowardly lion. He's the guy who stands up for what's right, and he has a big voice, but when it comes down to it, he can't get it done. He ran for president 3 different times, and he never won. He was like Henry Clay, only, madder. This is also going to be an era, so one era is about money, there's also going to be an era of unprecedented corruption. I actually don't love corruption, but the fact that it happened 145 years ago, it's a little bit easier to talk about. The wounds aren't so fresh anymore, Nathan. What does corruption mean? What's it mean to be corrupt in politics? Because we're going to do some corruption.
Like one definition could be
Do what?
one definition of corruption could be that maybe what he promised to do once he was in office, he didn't do, but instead turned it around to do what he wanted to do. So
Maybe, but that might be him changing his mind. What does corruption mean? Like, who is influencing a politician?
Millionaire.
Outside, traditionally money, right? Money is influencing politics, and politicians are making decisions based on who they're getting money from. Does that make sense? And we have corrupt politicians now, which looks different than it did before. Before it was they were taking literally just straight cash from people, and now they get money into their campaign put in there, right? They get essentially power. Isn't it odd that people who make millions of dollars a year want to stop doing that so they can become a congressman and make $150,000 a year? Doesn't that make anyone wonder, right? Because power becomes more important than money. And maybe they want to help America. Now, do you know gold is sold on a market? You know gold is sold on what's called a commodities market? So you can buy gold if you want to. Does this make sense? Jay Gould and Jim Fisk, could you believe Jay Fisk, they tried what's called corner the gold market. Do you know what corner a market means? Do what? They try to take over the market. And so what they start doing, they were able to persuade Grant's the president, they persuaded Grant not to release gold into the market. If they don't release gold into the market, what happens to the price of the dollar? If there's a limited amount of gold, what happens to the value of the dollar? It goes up, right? Dollars become more expensive. Does this make sense? And then becomes less inflation. And then what becomes very, very valuable if they don't put gold in the market? Gold does. They were able to convince Grant not to put gold in the market. And guess what Fisk and Gould started doing? Buying up a bunch of gold. And they were buying up bunches and bunches and bunches of gold, and since there was very little amount of gold in the market, they had tons of money. This is going to be an era where we talk a lot less about presidents and a lot more about like business people, right? And people fighting against business people. Like my favorite woman, Mary Lease, who said Kansas should raise less corn and more hell. Right? We talk about Mary Lease. Eventually, Grant saw that what they were doing was going to hurt the country, and they became really worried about two people cornering the gold market, and they ended up releasing the gold. And when they release the gold, what's going to happen in our economy? We're going to have a small panic.
Do you do this?
Here a little bit. Now, do you know what it means when a bubble bursts?
Oh, it was like
This has happened it happens in economics a lot. It's one thing that starts recessions. So what started? Do you guys know what started the last recession?
real
Here,
estate.
stop that for a second. You're right.